back to the third section of the show on the Shamima Begum, where I'm Councillor Premier, joined by my co-host, Councillor Andrew Rood, and today we're joined by Tasnime Akunjee, a lawyer who's been involved in the Shamima Begum case since 2015. So in this section, we're going to talk about the issues around her citizenship being stripped, and what could we have done locally as public institutions. Could we have given a view? There are some legal issues around her children who have now passed away. So I'm just going to pass it over to Tasnime. Now, so like Shamima had her citizenship stripped. What could Tower Hamlets Council have done in that before it went to court? For example, in your view?
Yeah, I'd just like to come in.
Yeah.
Just before we get to that, Andrew, you raised an important point about, knowledge of death. Yeah, how do we know that somebody in a war zone has died, and whether that actually triggers a serious case review? And I think it harks to the comment that was on the screen earlier. In 2017, there was a serious case review in Brighton and Hove Council in very similar circumstances to the ones that we find ourselves in, where a couple of children from a family went over to Libya, I think that was, and were killed. There was no death certificate, but the council decided that it wanted to learn lessons from that, and so conducted a serious case review in any event. That's siblings W and X. So, that's a council that's got out of his way to try and learn lessons in very similar circumstances.
Cool. So I've got another comment. A child safeguarding practice review is decided by government guidelines in working together with children. The case still meets the threshold regardless of what John Biggs says. But moving on, now Shamima had her citizenship stripped. I know, so like, obviously the family want her back, and a lot of people who know her or members of the community wanted her back. Could anything have happened? Could Tower Hamlets Council have done anything, especially when there were children involved, her children?
Well, I think the issue there is that, look, she was stripped by the Home Secretary in particular circumstances. Now, there have been people who've gone over to Syria and they've come back with, a very large majority have come back just before her, men as well who were fighters, and nobody did anything about it. And there have actually been people who've come back since Shamima Begum. There's a young woman who's been returned back to the UK. It's just Shamima Begum herself seems to be an iconoclast issue. And it's one that a Home Secretary has looked into. The Home Secretary had made a decision, and that was not anything to do with any council regulations or rules. That was to do with the British Nationality Act and an assessment. That assessment was, that she's not conducive to the public good, and that his assessment was that she wouldn't be left stateless should her British citizenship be taken away. So there's lots of arguments around that, but they have little nexus with the council itself. However, had the council conducted a serious case review, and back in 2015, we would have had the results of that before she even appeared in a camp. We would have learned lessons, but also we would have seen in black and white through an independent review just what the failings of our various organizations were and how they contributed to her, a child, making a decision to get or being groomed to go to another war zone. That would factor quite highly in terms of state culpability around whether that decision was proportionate.
Understood. So basically, if we had all the information, then what you're saying is the Home Secretary might have taken a different decision, a different risk assessment, and it could have been challenged. Is that what you're saying? Because there's a lack of information, for example, from a serious case review, you're saying that it actually impacted on the decision to strip her of her nationality, because my understanding is they carried out a risk assessment, and the risk assessment said she shouldn't be back in the country. And it's much more difficult to challenge it because there's no comparison as to the assessment made by the Home Secretary to any local assessments. Is that what you're saying? And I'll just move after your comment. I'll let
where we are at the moment is that Shamima Begum has no ability to communicate with her lawyers in any effective manner whatsoever. She doesn't know in any timely fashion what a court has said. There are no documents she has around the case, and she cannot communicate her evidence to the court back, really. So in that total lacuna of any evidence from her side, the argument was made that that's not an effective appeal process. But had we had some evidence from an inquiry or a serious case review, at least that could have been forwarded to show, hold on, we can't have failed as a state to protect Shamima Begum and then rely on our own failure and rely on our own lack of interest in discovering our failure or evidencing our failure to actually keep this woman out of the country, for fear that, you know, she may talk about things that would point out those failures.
And Andrew, do you want to come in on this?
No, that's a really good point, actually, because you know, obviously even today people are arguing about, you know, degrees of guilt and all the rest of it. But if we had done a serious case review, and you know, and it had proven that, you know, she was, you know, seriously groomed, and there were family issues and, you know, issues with her mother and all of the rest of it, and also again the information I read from that book may have, you know, cast her decision to go in a potentially different light, and therefore may have influenced the Home Secretary's decision, because we don't know what information that he acted upon when he made that decision. And I think the other interesting point as well is that, you know, if organisations fail, they tend not to want to publicise those failures, and again, you know, that is also having an impact as well on her case, I suspect.
I mean, it is a bit like asking Harold Shipman to write a review about his own practice, but you know, in the reason why, you know, the reason why it's important is because eventually statistics caught up with Harold Shipman and discovered he was murdering his patients, and something was done. But that was an external review of Harold Shipman and his practice, not an internal one, and that's why these things are so important.
Gotcha. Where do we go next? And so, like, Andrew, where do we go next with this? Especially with the citizenship, do you feel that Tower Hamlets should carry out an investigation and publish it so to assist?
So, I mean, one of the good things is that we have a new director of children's services who arrived a few months ago. So completely, you know, blank paper from that perspective. So I haven't spoken to him about this, but maybe he might be more willing to look at some of these historical issues because he wasn't involved with them. So that, you know, maybe, you know, worth re-asking that question about the serious case review with him, or whatever it's called now. Because the other point is actually a lot of staff have moved on. So, and that's the other concern I have about this process, is that in terms of learning lessons, if we're dependent on staff having been there and learned the lessons, but they then leave the council, where is that institutional knowledge about where we failed in the past, which is another justification for serious case reviews, because it puts it in black and white that we can then share with people. So yeah, it may be worth us as a council asking again that question, given that this is still a live issue.
I want to. My experience is that this kind of like goes beyond Shamima or the issues of counter-terrorism. There seems to be some kind of endemic kind of underlying problem, the way the council has been dealing with, say, youth offenders in general. I work in the criminal justice system. There's a high level of youth offending in our borough from children of certain demographics. That's also shown in the national statistics as well. It seems like 40% of all young offenders who are incarcerated come from BAME background. That's quite a large number. But it just from, I know there was an overview and scrutiny report or some kind of report where it showed that this problem is much wider, that extends to Yacht, our youth offending team, and other children's services aspect of it. It seems like we could learn lessons quite systematically. It's much wider than this narrow issue of children going to Syria. Andrew, do you want to come back on that?
Well, I mean, obviously there is a wider issue about why children get groomed to do certain things. So selling drugs is probably the most critical issue that we've got. County lines, you know, we had a child recently that was kind of was basically removed from Tower Hamlets and was taken somewhere else to sell drugs, and that person was then prosecuted, and I wasn't particularly happy with the sentence. But are we learning lessons from county lines in terms of how the children are groomed? And again, as a member of Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I'm not really sure. I'm sure within Children's Services, I know there's a separate team that looking at this. But again, where is the public evidence in the public domain that we are learning lessons and diverting the next generation children away from selling drugs or being involved in community lines?
Taz, before we go to the break, any final words from you, any final reflection, and where would you recommend? There's a lot of people agitated by this. Social media is divided, but there's a lot of people that are passionate about this. A lot of people saying if this could happen to Shamima, it could happen to anybody here. A decision taken by undemocratic, it's all like on the recommendation of non-elected officials. I've got a comment here. I hope Shamima Begum can return to the UK as she was a British citizen at the end of the day. She should stand trial so we can establish the truth and sentence accordingly. I hope she has reformed and can be a force of good. So Taz, over to you.
Well, look, I mean, Shamima Begum's, quite a divisive topic, really. Anywhere you look, if you look in the Daily Mail or the national media, you'll see voices on one side, voices on another, equally balanced. And if you look even within the government and the actual cabinet itself, you've got the Priti Patels and the Sajid Javeds on one side, and then you've got the Rees Moggs, rather surprisingly, on the other, who are asserting that she should return. So, it's divided the entire country. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that different people look at the situation through different lenses. Some people are looking at Shamima Begum's situation and not really thinking about her. They're thinking about the wider issues. What is citizenship? Can it be taken away? Is there now a two-tier system of citizenship? If your parents come from a different country, does that mean your British citizenship, even if you're born here, is of a different quality and value? So that's what one set of people are looking at the wider issues. The other side of people are looking at just Shamima Begum. What does she look like on TV as an X Factor contestant? And how do they feel towards it, really? Yeah. So there are different groups are looking at two different things, and then beyond that, other people are looking at it in a compassionate way. It's a young girl, 15 years old, groom taken over somewhere, and others are looking at it as a woman who's part of the evil ISIS. So it's got different levels of looking at things. One of my deep concerns is that the average reading age for the general public in the UK is 8 years old, only 8. Educated people are at the level of sort of 16 years old. So when you have a public that looks at debate in terms of what a primary school child would, that is why we end up with this sort of very divisive situation with little nuance, because that's how 8-year-olds look at anything. Right, you're on my side or you're on their side, and we see this in sort of the body politic today, really quite basic, blunt, and primary school level discourse. So I think we've got lots of problems here, and fundamental problems, and we really need to shake ourselves as a people and say, look, these things are actually relatively complicated. They need proper looking at and a balancing of things that are just beyond the 2-minute clickbait of what you think of somebody because of what they look like or what they say.
Cool. So we're gonna go off to a break now. Taz, I know you have to go, but feel free if you want to stick around.
Yeah.
Final section, Andrew and I just going to reflect on what's been said and give our views on it. So join us after the break. We're just going to go to a break now for the final section.